Hey there, it's Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
I read this article about, I don't know, a week or so ago. It was from Diana Gruver. It was about depression and major leaders that we would consider, the big guns for generations. Martin Luther, Mother Teresa, Charles Spurgeon. And she talked about them struggling with depression and doubt. And you know what? It was a great article. And I thought if I could just talk to this young lady, I'd love to hear her story. Well, we got her. She's on the show. Diana Gruver, how are you?
I'm great. It's so good to be with you guys this morning.
Hey, thanks for your time. And before we went live, and we are live now on Facebook and on the YouTube. But we talked a little bit about where Diana's from. She's in Greencastle, Pennsylvania, which is South Central Pennsylvania. I worked for my first radio station there in Greencastle. So it was so awesome just to catch up with what's going on. That metropolis, I'm sure, just keeps on growing.
Bustling metropolis. Yeah.
Diana, this book is called Companions in the Darkness, 7 Saints Who Struggled with Depression and Doubt. Why did you want to go this direction? Thank you for doing it. I enjoyed it. I think it really helped. It helped me, helping a lot of people. But what caused you to say, hey, I'm going to sit down and research this and see what's up?
You know, it started from a really personal motivation. I've struggled personally with depression. And when I first walked through that, I didn't know these stories. And so when I first discovered them while I was in seminary, you know, I think whenever you've walked through something painful, when you see some of the threads of that in someone else's story, it really sticks out. And there's something about that draws you to them. And so to find that some of these heroes, as you mentioned, throughout our history had struggled with depression, much like I had, it piqued my interest, and it made me wonder why I had never heard that part of their story. I think there's a lot of guilt that comes with depression, especially as a Christian, and a lot of stigma that's still there. And so I think there's a lot of power in the stories that we choose to tell or the stories that we stay silent about. So for me, it was a personal thing. You know, I wanted to learn from them. I wanted to understand more of what that experience was like. And that eventually blossomed into this book.
Now, I think obviously so many more people deal with depression than would actually say, yeah, I deal with depression. And to hear that there are people that we know that were heroes of the faith that we probably think they never had to deal with depression because they always walked with God and they were just so religious. But to hear that is probably very healing and helpful.
Yeah, and I think it undermines a lot of that stigma. There's a lot of judgment, I think, that comes with depression, especially in Christian communities, that if you just had some kind of the right spiritual willpower, or you prayed more, or you read your Bible more, or you just had more faith, that it would all go away. And I think that it's stories like the ones I tell in the book that really unravel some of that. I mean, no one's going to tell Charles Spurgeon, man, you should have spent more time studying your Bible. You know?
He didn't read it enough, did he? I mean, he didn't know his Bible. What did he know?
Yeah. And so to hear, you know, not just about fellow believers, but people that we respect, and we're still telling their stories, and we celebrate them as examples and leaders. If they struggled, it gives us some freedom to admit that we struggle and to be able to release some of that guilt that comes with it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, our culture outside of the church has come to terms with it. The church considers it I think it's growing in a sense, but a weakness for anyone, especially a spiritual leader. So that's why, you know, I'm not telling anybody. But, you know, I think what's happening is we're learning and understanding. If we read the Psalms, I mean, David struggled.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I'm so overwhelmed. I just want to go. I'm done. Yeah. But, you know, he eventually walked through that. And it's so good that you decided to sit down and write this. The book is called Companions in the Darkness, 7 Saints. We're going to find out all 7 saints in a minute who struggled with depression and doubt. Diana Gruver, she's an author, speaker, and a disciple. She also has some great blogs on her website. if you'll check that out. Diana, I would imagine, because you said that you'd never heard these things before, you really had to dig. Where on earth did you go to get these nuggets?
Some of the people, if you do a little bit of digging, come up pretty quickly. William Cooper, who was a hymn writer, David Brainerd, those two come up very quickly if you start talking about depression in church history. Some of the other ones took a little bit more careful reading. Charles Spurgeon, I think there's some biographers who have just skimmed over that part of his experience. There were some others that took some more digging. Hannah Allen is the second person I talk about in the book, and she lived in 17th century England. She's not a prominent church leader. I think she's a good representative of an everyday Christian struggling with depression. And I stumbled upon her in a history of psychiatry book, which I still have no idea why I was even there, but there she is, and now she's in the book. But yeah, I had to take a deep dive into each of these persons' life because for most of them, there hasn't been a systematic examination of depression in their life. That research was fun to me. I mean, spending time in their writings and their letters and these sorts of things. And I think if you take the time to look, it's clearly there. These aren't cases that I'm trying to force into my own image. You know, the evidence is there, the stories are there, the testimonies are there. And it's a joy to me to meet these brothers and sisters from history. They have so much to offer us. So it was fun to spend time with them.
Was there anything that surprised you as you were going through your research, especially as to how they dealt with the depression or maybe eventually worked through it? Anything that jumped out at you that surprised you?
I think one thing thematically that was very surprising, and I know other people have commented on this, that these people from history were a lot more comfortable with their depression than we are today. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we have this assumption that modern is better. And so in the modern world, even though it's not great, we must have a better view of depression than we did a few hundred years ago.
Right.
But in some cases, that's not true. I'm thinking, I mean, all of them up until probably the 20th century, there was this freedom to say, I'm a Christian, I struggle with depression. This is a bodily ailment that may entangle itself in my emotional and spiritual life, but there wasn't quite that same stigma and that guilty angst that came with it that we have now. And I think that's really surprising to see. And I think it's a great gift to us today to see that talking about depression matter-of-factly, talking about the need for self-care or for, you know, medical help in taking care of depression is not a modern thing. It's not an anti-Christian thing. It's something that we can regain, I think, from some of these believers from the past. So that's one thing I think that was very surprising. For many of them also, just the fact that this depression was so prominent or they talked about it and that we just don't know about it. I mean, Charles Spurgeon talks about his depression in some of his sermons. He had a lecture that's in a volume of lectures to his students at his pastor's college, preparing them for depression, saying it's probably going to come. You know, don't worry about, you know, that God has left you or that he's not going to use you. This is kind of how you navigate it. And the fact that is there, it's pretty evident. And yet we're not discussing it and exploring that as a part of their legacy, a part of their witness, a part of their wisdom. It just continues to surprise me.
Yeah.
Diana Gruver is an author, speaker, and a disciple and a discipler. She's got a book out. It's called Companions in the Darkness, 7 Saints Who Struggle with Depression and Doubt. And we want to find out the other 4. I know you mentioned a couple in a second. You need to get this book, and I'm sure you can get it on our website, definitely Amazon and some other places. But read the article. If you go to Christianity Today, it's still on there. I just found it and copied the link. It is right there. It's not actually on the front page any longer. You got to do a little searching, but it is there, and it is a great article. We do want to ask you, what you want folks to get out of this in a few, Diana, and also the response so far. Probably some people shock with people like Mother Teresa and Martin Luther and Charles Spurgeon. How about the other four? I know you mentioned, I think, a couple of other folks, but the other four, who are they and what did they do? What was their position or place?
So I'll run through the seven because I can't remember now exactly which ones. I know we talked about Charles Spurgeon. Martin Luther is the earliest one. He's the Protestant reformer. I'm sure many people have heard of him. Hannah Allen, I know that I mentioned. David Brainerd was a missionary to Native Americans in 19th century America. William Cowper, I mentioned, he was a poet and hymn writer in 18th century England, and actually really good friends with John Newton, who is the man who is famous for writing Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And then Mother Teresa, you mentioned, she, I think, is the hardest one to say she struggled clinically with depression, largely because we just don't have enough information. No one knew about her internal struggles until well after her death, in a book that was published of her letters and some of her private writings in the process of her canonization in the Catholic Church. But I think the spiritual experience that she had of just this pervasive darkness and God's silence and God's absence is something that people who struggle with depression have experienced. And so it felt like a very appropriate story to bring in. And then the most recent one is Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader.
Wow. Diana Gruver, check out the book and the article, Companions in the Darkness, 7 Saints Who Struggled with Depression and Doubt. I know you want, you've done this to make us all aware, so that we can say, hey, look at these folks. What else do you want folks to walk away with when they read the book?
I hope people know they are not alone. Depression is such an isolating experience, and it can be really easy to feel like no one has felt this way before, or it's a poor reflection on you, or you're left wondering, can God ever use me if I'm like this? And so I think there is a gift in sharing stories today, brother to sister, of stories of struggle and how God has met us in that. But these brothers and sisters from history, of being able to say, you're not alone. This is not a strange thing that is happening to you. There are other people who have walked this road, and this will not be the end of your story. There's such hope and comfort in that. And I guess I mentioned that, but just to emphasize this, that because you struggle with depression doesn't mean that you are faithless, and it doesn't mean that God can't use you. All of these people struggle deeply with depression and doubt and all that comes with it. But God still used them in that place of weakness. And some of them didn't get to see it in their lifetime. We might not get to see it. We might not get to see those happy endings, but it doesn't mean that God isn't present. And I think sometimes we need to look at stories from the past so that we can remember that and hold on to that hope for our present reality.
Diana, thank you for that reminder. Such a great story. Thank you for all the research that you did for this and for sharing these stories, so we can know that if we're struggling with depression, it's not because we're not praying enough and we're not godly enough or whatever. That people who are huge in the history of the church also struggled with that, and maybe forced them to rely on God more than they might have before. So thank you for all that you've done on this.
Well, it's a joy. And, I've learned so much from these people. Even in this season of the pandemic, I have found myself putting some of their wisdom into practice. So it feels like a privilege to have been able to sit up close with them over the last several years.
Perfect timing for this book, Diana. Thanks for putting it out. We'd love to catch up with you later on. We enjoyed talking with you. And, I think we can dig a little more into what you've done here just to really help all of us. Is Diana Gruver, author, speaker, disciple and discipler, Companions in the Darkness, 7 Saints Who Struggle with Depression and Doubt. She's got some great blogs in there. We don't have time to talk about them right now, but you can read those. Really, really good. about faith in the age of coronavirus. That's a really good one. DianaGruver.com. Let's take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.